My name is John Blankenship, and I am the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent for Tazewell County. I'm also on the Tazewell Soil and Water Conservation District Board. Today we will be working with the Department of Forestry and the Soil and Water Conservation District to provide a video for the Kids in the Woods program. This Kids in the Woods program will teach fourth graders about all the different things that they might encounter in the woods. And today we will be focusing on wildlife, learning about how to identify wildlife and learning about their habitats. To tell you about wildlife and different ways that you can use to identify wildlife, something that you have and carry with you all the time, and that is your five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. So if you think about if an animal came through here in the woods, we would be able to identify it just by the way it looks. That's called its phenotype. The way a deer would look coming in, it would be brown. You could see that its gait would be either trotting or galloping, and then it would come in as a animal that you could actually identify the difference between males and females. If the deer had antlers, and yes, we call them antlers because horns are on an animal that continuously has them throughout their whole life. Antler is a term that follows back to the term annual, which means once a year, and these deer will shed their antlers once a year. But if you see the antlers on the deer, you'll know that it is a male deer. So not only you know what kind of animal it is, you know whether it is a male or female, and that's very important if you're hunting in a buck-only season. So seeing and using our sight is probably one of the best ways we can use to identify animals, just by the way they look and the way they move, and also the signs that they may leave behind. For example, if a deer walks through the snow or the mud or the sand, they will leave tracks in the snow, and you will be able to identify that animal and the direction it's going and somewhat how long ago it had been there based on the direction of the hoof prints, the freshness of the track, and so on. Another way that you can identify animals is by the droppings they leave behind. Sometimes we call this scat because the bear here has very large droppings and a chipmunk would have very small droppings. And we can look at the different types of droppings. The deer leaves little pellets behind, and we can tell very much about the animal using our sense of sight and being able to identify these different animals. Another sense that we can use to identify animals is our sense of hearing. For example, this animal here is very popular in Virginia as one of the big game animals that's hunted in Virginia, and this is a wild turkey. Now the wild turkey has a beard off the side that we could see if it was a male. And if it is a beardless turkey, then it would not be able to be harvested during the springtime when the hens are actually on the eggs. But thinking about hearing, the turkey is something that we use hearing very much for in being able to hunt. All different animals make their own sounds, and we can identify the different ones by the sounds they make. But if we're hunting for a turkey and we hear a turkey gobble, that tells us three things about that turkey. First, it tells us, one, it's a turkey, and that's what we're here to hunt today. The second thing it tells us it's a male turkey, because the turkey with the beard and the turkey that has that does the gobbling is the male. Those are the gobblers. And then the third thing it tells us is the location, which is very important if we're hunting. For example, if the gobble comes from up this way, we would set our decoys up between us and where that gobble is before we start hunting. We wouldn't be looking for the animal to come in the other direction. So we do get a sense of direction, we get a sense of the type of animal, and sometimes actually the sex of the animal just by the sense of hearing. Another sense that we might think about is the sense of touch. When we feel different animals, they feel differently. Many times we don't have the opportunity to touch a wildlife because they are wildlife and they're wild. They run away from us. But if we can touch this turtle, we can feel how hard its shell is and the actual scales that it has on its shell. We touch a bird, like this duck would have feathers, and feathers feel very different from the shell and the scales of the reptiles. A fish, for example, and this is a hide from a fish here, a fish would have scales. Some of them are very slick and slimy. Some of them are very large and porous. It depends on the species of fish. So we can identify different ones by the touch and the way they feel. Another thing that we can feel is the fur on animals. Like this black bear has a very thick, coarse fur. The deer has a special feeling fur. The rabbit down here, the fur is very soft. So you can take a difference in the feel of all of those furs to be able to identify that animal. One of my favorite ones is smell. Now, if we were a hunting dog, our sense of smell would be much more defined, and we would be able to identify different animals much easier and much farther away, or maybe where they had left a scent trail in the woods. But we can even use our sense of smell to smell the different animals. If you've ever been up close to animals, you'll see that the bear has a smell, and the deer has a smell, and the fox has a smell. But the one smell that we notice most of all is this fellow right here, the black and white striped skunk. When you see that skunk, you usually smell him before you see him. Yeah, my favorite saying is that you can identify a skunk driving down the road 55 miles an hour with the windows rolled up, because they really stink. But the skunk is a great example of the way we can use our sense of smell to identify an animal. And then the last one I want to talk about is our sense of taste. Now you might say, well, how would you use your sense of taste to identify an animal? Well, that is one of the things that drives many hunting and fishing enthusiasts, is the sense of taste, because all of these animals have different taste. For example, if you catch a trout, it'll taste different from a catfish. And if you catch a catfish, it'll taste different from a bass. And a bass will taste different from a walleye. There's all different types of taste just within the fish category. And then when you go over to wildlife, you would think about a squirrel. A squirrel tastes different from a deer or a bear or whatever. A rabbit has a special taste. So many times people like to hunt because they love to have the variety of the different tastes of animals that they've harvested. Now, we go to McDonald's and we get either a burger, which would be beef, we get a chicken sandwich, which maybe would be poultry, or we would get a biscuit with bacon on it in the morning or something, which would be pork. Basically, you've just got 3 different types of tastes there from 3 different animals. But think about all of the animals that are around us in the woods, and think about all the different tastes they have. Today I'd like to close just a little bit talking about the habitat that these animals live in. The habitat is a place that these animals get food, water, and shelter. Those are the 3 requirements that make up a habitat for an animal. An animal can't stay in an area if it doesn't get food. The most important nutrient for an animal is water. They have to have readily access to water. And then they need shelter from the wind, from the rain, different things like that. These animals are adapted to be outside all the time, but they can find a place in the woods that's nestled away to where there's not a lot of wind, there's not a lot of rain, and they can find themselves a place to be sheltered. So the habitat is very essential, and when we're out in the woods, we need to think about protecting that habitat and making sure that the habitat is there for our generation and generations to come, as well as the wildlife that may be there today and the generations of wildlife to come. Thank you very much. My name is John Blankenship, and I enjoyed working with you today in this virtual opportunity to learn about wildlife in the woods. Thank you. Here's a great example in this rhododendron of a place that is a good habitat for wildlife to provide the shelter that we talked about. They have a nice cool place on the hot days in the sun. It's just like your bedroom. You can go down here and lay down. And then they also have food nearby, as well as a water source just over the hill. So there's a nice babbling brook over here that these animals can go get a nice drink of water and supply those water needs. And then they would be able to come back into this area here that would be sheltered from the snow and the wind and the rain.